Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Killing Eve season 4, the final season of the show. Let's talk about it. So was it not just the other day, where I mentioned in my Peaky Blinders season 6 review that I was just truly distraught, just truly in mourning over the fact that one of the best TV series ever made, truly ever made, had come to an end? Like, was it literally just not last week that I was suffering? I was in pain and suffering over the end of Peaky Blinders, one of my favorite shows of all time. Was it not just a few days ago that I endured this? And was it not in that very same video that I mentioned that in a few weeks time, like literally any day now, in T-minus 10 seconds, I would be experiencing even further trauma, even further pain and suffering due to the loss of This Is Us also? Was it not in that same video that I mentioned this? But little did I know that I was going to be in for more pain and suffering in the next coming days, because Killing Eve was also due to wrap up soon. I literally had no idea that the season finale was coming this week. I literally had no idea. I was just logging into twitter.com and imagine my surprise, imagine my shock and bamboozlement when I saw Killing Eve trending for its bombastic and inevitable finale. I was shook. I was like, what do you mean finale? What do you mean? What is going on? And so I only got a chance to see not only the finale, but also episode 7, which I'd forgotten about actually, when we'll talk about my thoughts on the season overall and why I forgot about episode 7. But I watched the 2 episodes today on Monday and I'm still reeling, honestly. I'm still reeling. I just told you guys, like, I'm still trying to get over Peaky Blinders from last week. I can't believe I have to endure this also. But here we are, we're discussing the final season of Killing Eve, a show that I thought was one of my very favorite TV shows on air, and a show which has unfortunately also left us in the year of 2022. But before we get into my thoughts and feelings on the final season of Killing Eve, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. And also be sure to follow me on Twitter. I have been logging into twitter.com recently a little bit more frequently, so you can follow me on there for updates and tweets about TV shows that I don't get a chance to review here on this channel. But now, without further ado, friends, let's get into my thoughts on the final season of Killing Eve. So for this review, I'm going to be going through the characters of this series, and the first character up is the titular character herself, Eve, who has been expertly portrayed by Sandra Oh for these 4 seasons. Now in season 4, you see Eve in a very different place compared to the Eve that we were introduced to in season 1, and that has pretty much been the core storyline, the core character arc of this entire series, is showing the descent of Eve, who used to be a straight shooting, MI6, was it MI5 agent, and now has become a rogue, solo player who's out for her own vengeance, who's out here, killing people, maiming people. She has gone through a whole character transformation, and it is a result of the, missions, the past missions, but also the negative influences that she's had in her life, which has turned her into the person that she becomes by season 4. But here in season 4, we see Eve trying to track down the 12. She is going on a solo mission to find out who these people are and I guess like take them to justice, take down the organization from within. And her aim for this mission has been to pursue Helene, who was Villanelle's handler, or rather the boss of her handler, who was really Konstantin. Eve has been pursuing her because she sees her as the way in to figuring out who the 12 are and hopefully taking them down for good, especially after what they did to Kenny in the previous season. R.I.P. Kenny. He was very much much missed, okay, in these past couple of seasons. But anyway, so we see Eve actually manage to track down Helene, and they have several interactions together where I guess they were trying to recreate this kind of sexual tension between the two that Eve has with Villanelle, although not to the same extent. I don't think they were anywhere near as electric together. I think it felt a little bit forced at times, if I'm being honest, but that's what they were trying to go for, the angle that they were trying to go for. Helene is an incredibly messed up, twisted individual. After all, I mean, she is in charge of, you know, people like Villanelle who are out there being assassins, you know, killing people on her whim. So she has to be she has to be pretty messed up to operate on that level, right? But we see her in these more intimate moments with Eve, as Eve is trying to dig for more information, and she herself is trying to dig for information from Eve as well. They have some pretty interesting interactions, especially the first meeting in Helene's house where Eve's hand ends up stuck on a stove and she's just stuck there. She refuses to flinch and she literally just looks her dead in the eye whilst her hand is burning, flesh burning on the stove, okay? That was a pretty badass moment, but for the most part I did feel like the chemistry that they were trying to manifest in these two characters was kind of lost on me personally, and it certainly didn't help that their whole relationship was born out of the storyline surrounding the 12, which I said in my review of season 3 I did not care about. and this is the point where, like I mentioned, I did a review of season 3 and the episodes of season 3, which is on my channel. You can dig through my channel to find those if you're curious, but I explicitly gave the series instructions for how to proceed and how to improve upon season 3, which was already a little bit wobbly. I gave them instructions on how to proceed, and one of those instructions, if I'm remembering clearly, although this was 2 years ago, mind you, but one of those instructions was to annex the 12 storyline. Annex that immediately. No one cares about the 12. I can tell you that much for free. No one cares about that. Do you care about the 12? No, you don't. Why are you lying? No, you don't. Literally, no one cares about the 12. And that's one of the problems with the series, which we'll talk about more in a second. But the series doesn't quite understand what people are watching for. The series got a little bit confused about why people were tuning in. And for some reason, they thought we cared about the 12. And I understand that you need to have like a plot and you need to have a big bad, and you know, I get that, but at the end of the day, that's not really why we were tuning into Killing Eve, and we'll talk about why it was that we were tuning in a moment. But I will say, when it comes to the 12 storyline, it's all well and good setting up Eve's descent into moral ambiguity to put it lightly. That's all well and good and everything, but it needs to have a solid payoff if you're going to do that. If the 12 is going to be such a big deal where not only is Eve invested in this mission, but also Carolyn and also ultimately Villanelle, then they need to act as worthy adversaries for all three of these incredible, iconic women. And the 12 simply did not meet up to the task. They absolutely did not. And yes, even though they had their avatar in the form of Helene, who had those interactions with Eve, it wasn't enough, because ultimately Helene is taken out of the equation in episode 6. So you're left with no one representing the 12 other than what people say of them, and even that is like really vague and just full of riddles. When you ultimately meet the 12, it's supposed to be this momentous occasion where you're like, wow, no wonder why it took all three of these women to even figure out where these guys would be. Like, no wonder why we had to invest 2 seasons worth of storytelling, maybe even 2.5 seasons worth of storytelling to figuring out who these guys were, because they are truly, you know, worthy adversaries for the gang. Like, oh my goodness, these guys are the ultimate big bads. But we don't get that. We don't get that because in the season finale, what we do end up getting is just this faceless group who are in the basement of a ship. Meanwhile, there's a whole wedding going on upstairs and they're just having their creepy little meeting. But Villanelle is able to dispense of them pretty easily, like literally within seconds, literally within the runtime of the Candy song. She's able to kill them all off. So it's like, all of this to find these guys? Really? That's why Eve lost her soul, to find them? it was just disappointing as hell. And again, I had a feeling that this could be the case, which is why I said in my review of season 3 that they should not have invested so much in the 12 storyline. It was a huge mistake, and ultimately it didn't even pay off, which makes it even worse. But even though the 12 storyline wasn't the most compelling, and it certainly wasn't the reason why I tuned in to watch the series every week, I do think the series did a good job of having that descent into chaos and moral disruption that Eve had. I do think that it was portrayed very convincingly. It was very gradual. It was something that was clearly very well telegraphed earlier on and then paid off at the end, because she was doing some, you know, horrific things, especially in episode 7, where she gouges out Gun's eyes. Gun, who is an assassin who was working under Helene, you know, she all of a sudden goes crazy over Villanelle, which, can you blame her? Like, look at the material. Anyway, she goes crazy over Villanelle, and then Eve comes along on her island in Scotland. She owns an island, okay, so this is making moves, and Eve ends up gouging out her eyes during an altercation, and it's like, whoa, you are not the Eve that we knew in season 1. You're built different, okay, sis? So I do think that, you know, descent and in her character was done really well, really convincingly, and of course it was supported by the fact that Sandra Oh just killed it in this role. Like, she was just phenomenal for all 4 seasons. Okay, so the next character up we have is the icon herself, the legend, like the truly phenomenal VIP of this series, Miss Villanelle. Step up to the plate. She deserves a huge round of applause. Jodie Comer deserves a huge round of applause. I truly think that this is one of the very best characters ever depicted on television. I know that I have been using a ton of hyperbole in my reviews of Peaky Blinders and Killing Eve, but like, am I lying? Am I lying? Jodie Comer gave the performance of a lifetime, of several lifetimes on this show, and it breaks my heart to see what ultimately came of the character. But before we get into the season finale, because we'll talk about it in a moment, let's go through this character's journey throughout this season specifically, because she starts off honestly in like the polar opposite side of the kind of moralistic spectrum in comparison to Eve, where Eve has just accepted that she's no longer the woman that she used to be. She's doing all sorts of maiming, torturing, kidnapping actual children, you know, playing with this man who is assisting her on this mission, you know, playing with his feelings and emotions, leading him on, even though she made it very clear that she didn't want anything, you know, commitment wise. But at the same time, she had him wrapped around his finger, and she knew it. Sis, you knew it. Anyways, so Eve is just like on a completely different side of the spectrum, but Villanelle is trying to be on the opposite side of the spectrum, where she has embraced religion at the beginning of the season. She even wants to be baptized. Like, she really wants to commit herself to this new lifestyle so that she can distance herself as much as possible to the horrors of her past and the pain that she has caused a bunch of people because of, you know, being under Helene's thumb. So at the beginning of the season, we do get these fun interactions with Villanelle and this local church group, who she ultimately destroys from within after finding out some secrets about their pastor. And she even gets close to the pastor's daughter, but unfortunately that implodes because of sharing said secrets. And she ultimately ends up killing not just the pastor but also his daughter in this horrific sequence that takes place in a tent involving a pole. Okay, it was madness. All the while she's being counseled, I guess, by this like alter ego Villanelle, who appears as Jesus, appears as a version of Jesus Christ Superstar, but in reality is the devil who is leading her down this dark path back again. Villanelle's attempt to distance herself from her true nature fails pretty early in the season. We even see her have this comprehensive therapy session with that guy from the previous seasons whose name escapes me at the moment, but she essentially like kidnaps him, or rather traps him in his house, and in this this perpetual counseling session until she thinks that she's made a breakthrough. But essentially this, compounded with her efforts to find God, are just, you know, signs that she is really spiraling and really struggling with her sense of self and identity, because she's starting to feel some conflict about her role as an assassin and all of the, you know, death and pain that has surrounded her, because she's been exposed to people like Eve, who have really allowed her to see, you know, a different side of things, morally speaking. But ultimately what this season really showed when it came to the character of Villanelle is that deep down, you know, she has a talent, she has a gift for killing, for murder. And as Carolyn herself said to her when, you know, Villanelle was sent to kill her, you know, she said that's not something that she should try to rid herself of. It's something that she should embrace because it's a part of her. And yes, this is very messed up, obviously, you know, this isn't a life lesson that should be applicable to us all, but in the case of Villanelle as a character, I do think it was a really, you know, deep moment for her where she came to realize that yes, you know, there are definitely issues with what she has done in the past, but ultimately she can't change everything about herself. It's just not sustainable for her, and if she is going to kill, at the very least she's going to do it for good reason. And that's when you see her assisting Carolyn's friend and her friends as well with their abusive partners. You also see her trying to pursue the 12 and Helene. She ends up killing Helene in this like horrific way, where isn't it everyone's worst nightmare to have their ankles sliced? Like, is that just me? Especially the Achilles tendon. Is it not everyone's worst nightmare to have your feet out and like under the bed someone just slices your Achilles tendon? Or is that just a reoccurring nightmare that I've had? Because that scene playing out triggered the hell out of me. So you can definitely see the shift from Villanelle killing indiscriminately versus the Villanelle in season 4, who very much thinks about her targets now and is trying to practice restraint, even though she knows and appreciates the skills that she has in this field. And this all leads us to the season finale, where we see Villanelle using her special skills, okay, her gifts as it were, to kill the entire 12 on the ship. And it is a pretty glorious scene. Again, you have that juxtaposition between the, you know, violent and gruesome nature of Villanelle's job, you know, her line of work, versus Eve, who's upstairs enjoying the wedding, dancing to the Candy song. And also notably, it's at a gay wedding, insinuating that like this could be their future as well, perhaps like in an alternate timeline. We'll talk about it. In an alternate timeline, this could have been where these two ended up. But ultimately that wasn't written in the stars, because soon after Villanelle disposes of the 12, we see her get shot out from God knows where, and then Villanelle and Eve end up jumping right into the Thames to avoid further gunshots. But unfortunately that doesn't help, because Villanelle ends up getting shot again and again and again whilst she's underwater, and Eve is literally just inches away from her, just out of reach from her. Again, symbolic of their entire relationship throughout this series. And Villanelle ends up sinking to the bottom of the River Thames because she's dead. Because this show hates me. And so now we get into the show's biggest problem, and that is that it never quite understood the assignment. It never quite understood what it was supposed to do, because the writers seemed to be under the misconception that the fans were tuning in to watch this show for the plot and for the plot line surrounding the 12 specifically. And let me tell you right now, that is incorrect. That is fundamentally flawed thinking, because in reality fans were tuning in for one thing and one thing only, and that was to see Villanelle and Eve together on screen. Yep. That's it. That's what we wanted to see. And so now tell me why we only got 5.6 seconds of that screen time in this season, keeping in mind that this was the final season of the show, and instead we focused so heavily on all of this other fluff stuff that no one really cared about. Tell me why that happened. Why? Because they didn't understand the assignment. And the thing is, when I watched the trailer for season 4, all of the comments underneath that YouTube video were like, I hope Villanelle and Eve get more screen time together this season. That's what I really want to see. Like, literally everyone was saying the same thing. everyone was saying the same thing. And the show knows that this was an issue, especially after season 3, where the two were barely together until the very end of that season, where they had the most heartfelt moments, the moment that literally shone for the entire season. I don't even know what the hell happened in season 3. That's literally the only scene that I can remember with them on the bridge walking away from each other. That's literally it. That's literally it. That's all that mattered. And also the scene where they were dancing together. That's all we cared about. But no, the writers seem to think we cared about Helen. We cared about the 12. We cared about like all this other stuff that just doesn't matter. And then in the end, they gave us 5.6 seconds of Eve and Villanelle together on screen. Huge mistake. Huge mistake. But it gets worse because then they decided to double down. They didn't even allow us to have a happily ever after off screen where we could just go wild with our imaginations. No. They instead decided to kill off one of the most iconic characters ever created for television. I literally couldn't make this stuff up. Like, why is Villanelle dying in the season finale? You've already killed the vibe. Why kill the character? And I say that this series didn't understand the assignment. I'm not just saying it as like a cool kind of internet reference or whatever, but I genuinely think that somewhere along the way, the writers lost sight of what to do with the characters of Eve and Villanelle and their electric chemistry. Because the thing is, Sandra Oh and Jodie Comer's chemistry on this series is literally unmatched. Like, you could count on one single hand, the number of characters on television or even in film that have the level of on-screen chemistry that these two have. And so the idea that this series would waste that and just fail to give, again, the fans what they ultimately want until the very end is just mind-boggling. And again, going back to the whole didn't understand the assignment thing, I think what the problem was is that the series did such a great job setting up the relationship between these two, you know, how their paths would meet, and setting up the just incredible, palpable sexual tension between these two characters up until around season 2, where things just kind of exploded. But unfortunately, they just didn't know where to go with these characters after that. Like, they really just fumbled the bag when it came to fulfilling the great potential of this relationship. And so they instead decided to kind of drag out the reunions between these characters more and more, when in reality what they should have done is just embrace the fact that these two are incredible on screen together and have them work together more, because then at least it would have made for a more enjoyable viewing experience as opposed to the frustrating one that it has been for the past couple of seasons where they've been apart. And unfortunately, another reason why the ending of this relationship is just so problematic is because it perpetuates the whole bury your gays stereotype that we see in media. And for those of you who don't know, it's a story trope that we see in media where an LGBTQ character will be allowed to fall in love with their love interest and be happy for all but 2.5 seconds before they're promptly killed off. We see it time and time again. There was a moment in 2016, 2017 where the CW was pumping out these storylines like no one's business, and people started calling it out, and they were like, well, hang on, why is it that every single time an LGBTQ character finally, you know, has their love interest, you know, finally is allowed to have that love story play out on screen, they're promptly killed off? Like, what are you trying to say here? What are you trying to say here, media? Because the thing is, in isolation, in one TV show, it seems pretty innocuous. Like, you're not going to think that it's particularly malicious, but when you see it constantly throughout all of these TV shows and films, it starts to create this kind of image of LGBTQ people not being allowed to just live, you know, fulfilled and happy lives, especially with people that they love. And it's just not great. It's not a positive image to convey. That's not the kind of representation that we want. And so unfortunately, in the case of Killing Eve, it kind of plays into that, where the second that Eve and Villanelle were finally happy together, they finally shared a kiss that wasn't just full of surreptitiousness, but was actually emotional pure and actually, you know, full of love and joy. The second that they had that moment, Villanelle was ripped away from Eve's arms. She ends up dying, sinking straight to the bottom of the River Thames, no less. And unfortunately, with Villanelle's death, another LGBTQ love story bites the dust. So yeah, I just thought that the ending was a terrible, terrible idea. I really, really disliked what ultimately happened with the character of Villanelle. And what made it worse is that we find out soon afterwards who commanded this operation, and that was Carolyn herself. Now, Carolyn's storyline is tied into the 12, who I've already mentioned I really do not care about. But when it comes to Carolyn's storyline, it was really about digging into her roots and seeing her past, her legacy as a spy and someone in espionage, and really just like the cruelty of the character, the kind of edge that she has that makes her so good at her job, but also makes her ultimately quite untrustworthy, as Eve discovers. And I think that was a really interesting storyline, seeing this, you know, a middle-aged woman who has a past, and she's still out here on these streets, even though she's been banished by MI5 and banished from the Russian government. She's betrayed pretty much everyone, but she's still trying to figure out who heads up the 12, and she's still trying to, I guess, get revenge or justice for the death of her son. That whole storyline was a little bit murky for me. It was so difficult to truly understand Carolyn's motives, and I think that's the point, because she's a very complex character. But yeah, I do think they did a great job of diving into her past and giving us a bit more of an insight into this character. But unfortunately, that ending just kind of took me all the way out. When you find out that she's the one who ordered the hit on Villanelle, especially after getting that episode where they connected after Villanelle tried to kill her, we should have known. Like, we should have known that Carolyn didn't actually forgive Villanelle for trying to kill her. We should have goddamn known. But yeah, oh god, I was just like, I'm still not even over it. I'm so sad. Either way, just like with the rest of the ladies on the show, Fiona Shaw absolutely killed in this role. Like, she was just incredible as this character. This like incredibly complex and opaque character. And ultimately, Carolyn won. Like, she had played the game the longest, and she was the best at playing it, and she won by getting Villanelle to do her dirty work and ultimately disposing of Villanelle as well, who has caused her a ton of troubles over these years, but also attempted to end her life earlier this season. So then the last kind of main storyline we had this season was between Konstantin and his new protege, Pam. Now, Pam is a very interesting character who's introduced this season. I think she's supposed to be a reflection of Villanelle and the different path that Villanelle could have taken had she refused to go with the 12 and kill under Helene. And I think in that way, when you see that parallel, it is kind of fulfilling to see Pam ultimately turn away from this life. She ends up actually killing Konstantin, which is just really horrific, and it was under Helene's orders. Little did she know that Helene had already died, and there wouldn't have been any consequences should she have not followed those orders. But alas, it was too late when she found out, and Konstantin ends up dying on the floor after being sliced by a pizza cutter. So undignified. Anyone can get it on this show. But yeah, I was really sad to see Konstantin go. Again, what a complex character, but he was kind of fun. He had a great father-daughter relationship with Villanelle, much to the chagrin of his actual daughter. And seeing him, you know, start to train up Pam, but his heart really wasn't in it because he just wanted her to escape this life, I think was a really nice way to kind of round off the character. And again, he has also transformed quite a bit if you consider where he was at in season 1. So ultimately, I would say that this series did a lot right. I think that the actors acted their asses off for every single episode of this show, because there were some incredible performances here. I really enjoyed the aesthetic of the show, the feel of the show, its kind of dark comedic elements. There are also some like supernatural elements put in there. It was just such a fun, unique take on a spy thriller / spy drama. And then of course you have the two core characters, the two leads, who really held it down, held the whole show on their capable shoulders with their electric on-screen chemistry that unfortunately was never truly fulfilled, you know, and was never really done justice, because the series decided to drag out the union of these these characters for far too long and ended up missing their chance at allowing the audiences to enjoy the relationship. And so with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Killing Eve season 4 a 7 out of 10. And whilst we're here, I might as well rate the overall show, and I'm going to be giving Killing Eve an 8 out of 10. So that's it from me. Oh my goodness, another one bites the dust, guys. I am running out of really great shows to watch that have nothing to do with the comic book anything. So if you have any recommendations, I'm always open to them, because this is truly heartbreaking. But now that I told you guys my thoughts on Killing Eve season 4 and the series overall, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this season down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.